Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jamie Eads.
Hey, how's it going out there, everybody? Welcome to the Drum Shuffle. Jamie Eads joining you as I do each and every week. This is episode 114. I hope all of you are having a great week out there. We're having a good week over here at the Drum Shuffle World Headquarters. Fall is officially here. I did survive the fishing trip, and I'm very sad to report so did all of the fish from last week. They just did not cooperate with us, but I had a great time hanging out with my brothers from the band Funnel, and got some much-needed R&R. We have a fantastic episode for you this week. I'm going to be joined by the multi-talented Patrick Ferguson right after this message from our sponsor, Los Cabos Drumsticks. The best kept secret for drummers is finally out. Los Cabos Drumsticks may look like the sticks you grew up with, but these are not your father's drumsticks. Los Cabos Drumsticks is Canada's #1 drumstick brand, and they are coming to a retailer near you. With operations in over 28 countries worldwide, thousands of drummers have already discovered the Los Cabos difference. Using FSC certified wood from Canada and the US, Los Cabos make the finest quality drumsticks, percussion tools, and accessories on the market. The best news, Los Cabos Drumsticks offers you a ton of choice. They have 22 individual drumstick models and 14 percussion tools, many of which are available in 3 different wood types: maple, white hickory, and red hickory. Red hickory comes from the center or heart of the hickory tree and has been independently proven to be both stronger and more elastic than white hickory without adding a lot of weight. While most drumstick manufacturers have shunned red hickory, Los Cabos Drumsticks has embraced it, becoming the only established stick brand in the world to offer a full line of red hickory drumsticks. To learn more about Los Cabos Drumsticks, visit them online at loscabosdrumsticks.com. Follow them on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and don't forget to ask for Los Cabos Drumsticks at your favorite retailer. Dare to be different. Join the Red Hickory Revolution with Los Cabos Drumsticks. All right, guys and girls, I'm about to be joined by my buddy, Patrick Ferguson. Patrick is probably most well known for his work with the band 5/8 out of Athens, Georgia. Just a fantastic band. And we talk a lot about their history and Patrick taking some time away from that band. He also plays with a really cool Japanese kind of punk rock band called Pinky Dinky Poodle. Just absolutely the best name in all of rock and roll, if you ask me. And right before the pandemic, he spent some time out on the road with Mike Mills from R.E.M. and the legendary Chuck Leavell. So really cool stuff. He's got an amazing resume, but he is also, to my knowledge, he'll be the first fellow podcaster that I've had on the Drum Shuffle. And he is the producer and host of Crash and Ride podcast. And if you haven't checked it out, you should. The podcast deals with musicians who are suffering from anxiety, depression, trauma, substance abuse, or have suffered from those things. And it offers a message of experience, strength, and hope for others. And it's very powerful. It's wonderful. And we do talk quite a bit about that. It's just really a great drummer hang for an hour and 20 minutes. I know you're going to get a lot out of it. You're probably going to cry. You're probably going to laugh, but I know that you're going to be entertained above all else. So please help me welcome to the Drum Shuffle, Patrick Ferguson. Patrick, how you doing, brother? How's things going?
Things are, good for quarantine.
Man, no matter who listens to my podcast, they're going to think like for the last 6 months, when they're listening to this 20 years from now, they're going to be like, God, that stuff went on forever. Because every guest, you know what I mean? It's ridiculous at this point.
I have been doing at the beginning of every episode of Crash and Ride, my podcast. I do a little. Today is September 14th, 2020, 186 days of quarantine.
Yeah.
Because I know that at some point, hopefully, people will listen back to this and be like, man, that was a grim time. Glad that's over.
Yeah, man. It's, it's so brutal for our industry. I mean, you and I are lucky that we do have some sort of creative outlet with our podcasts, right? Mm-hmm. And that's good. But man, I'm ready to play a show, and I know everybody else is. And even though I don't rely on that for, my main source of income, so many people do. And
yeah, totally.
It's just brutal right now. Brutal.
Are you practicing?
Yeah, man, as much as I can, of course, like everybody else, I live in a subdivision, the neighbors don't like it very much. And, I haven't spent, a ton of money to, soundproof my house. Now, I've got my little podcast studio in my, in my office, but I can't put the bottom kit in here and just rip. You know what I'm saying?
No, I do. I have not been practicing drums as much. I've been playing a lot of guitar, which I'm terrible at, but I don't think anybody enjoys it more than I do.
Yeah.
And I've been, I had a show this week. I did a streaming show. There's a Japanese punk rock band called Pinky Doodle Poodle that are over here from Tokyo, and they got their visa cleared. We had 3 practices and COVID started. And we were supposed to do a national tour. I was supposed to be on tour. I was supposed to be in Europe right now with them, actually.
Oh, wow.
And, but their visa was approved. Instead of 3 years, they got 18 months because of the state of the State Department now. And they're just sitting there burning daylight with like no shows. And so there's a local bar that has a streaming setup. So we did I wore a mask. The lead guitar player wore a mask. The girl who sings was maskless, but everyone else, sound man, the cameraman, and the owner of the bar were the only other people in the room. And we streamed a show with everybody all masked up. And they made a little money, They had a little virtual tip jar.
Cool. Yeah, well, just last week, I started hearing rumblings from the community, like Facebook is starting to crack down on, live performances, apparently, as of October 1st. I don't know what the hell they think we're all supposed to do, but my God, man, are you trying to kill the arts, or, what exactly is the agenda here? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't understand why. I've sort of seen that go by, and I've thought if I dig into this and have one more thing to be angry about in 2020, I just have you ever seen that picture from the Middle East, and there's a donkey, and it's yoked to a little cargo wagon, and there's so much stuff in the wagon that all 4 of the donkey's feet are up off the ground, like the yokes are pointed skyward. That's where my anger level is right now.
Dude, you and me both, man.
So overloaded and frustrated and angry all the time that I just I needed that show. I'm glad I played it with a heavy rock band.
Yeah, man. Well, first of all, I am not familiar with their material, but, I saw that in your bio line, and they have the greatest band name of all time, I think.
It is the most Japanese rock band name ever. Pinky Doodle Poodle.
That is perfect. So,
yeah.
Well, it sucks for them that, they get their visa approved, which is surprising to me because, they're from a different country, so they must be here to kill us all. But,
man, that process was brutal.
Oh, I'm sure.
The first, so they were here before. They had a label in Buffalo, that got their first visa and then didn't tell them, like forgot to communicate to them, like clock's ticking. So they had a 3-year visa. And then the last year of it, they were like playing catch up because they didn't get over here until they only had like 13 months left on the first visa. That label, some of the kindest people I've ever met, and just absolutely lovely, but maybe not the most organized cats. So like, I don't want to run anybody's reputation into the ground, but like Biggie Little Poodle loves to tour. That's all they want to do. They want to play shows, and they should have been here for the whole 3 years, but they were only here for like 13 months. Then that visa ran out. They had to go back to Japan, and then I hired an immigration lawyer on their behalf in Atlanta, and that whole process stretched out over months, and they got denied on their first request and then had to appeal. And then they only got 18 months, and now they're here and the clock is running on the 18 months, and they're just
can't do anything. Yeah, man, it's just
stinks.
It's just bad timing. Well, so as is the tradition on the Drum Shuffle, let's give everybody a little bit of your background. And I think when we start talking about some of your projects, people are immediately going to be like, "Oh yeah, okay, got it." Yeah. But are you a native of the Athens, Georgia area originally, or where is home base for you?
Well, so now I currently live outside of Athens in the country. I really like living in the country because I'm originally from the country. I'm from a tiny town in North Carolina called Eden. And, my grandpa was a postman. My grandma was a textile mill worker, and my mom came up from fairly humble Appalachian, beginnings and became an opera singer, which is the craziest thing.
Oh wow!
She got a scholarship to the University of North Carolina for voice, and then within 2 years had already been had an audition scheduled for the Met in New York City, and was gonna, and she met my dad, and they got married pretty young. My dad went to Vietnam. He was a Air Force officer, and so we bounced around when my dad got back from Vietnam for years. My mom eventually gave up opera because I don't know if you've known a lot of conservatory musicians, but like I've known people that went all the way through colleges. A girl I used to date who played cello, did 4 years cello scholarship under one of the best cello teachers in the world, a guy named Charles Starkweather. Wait a minute. Is Charles Starkweather the Texas Tower gunman?
No, that was Charles Whitman.
Okay. Yeah, so Starkweather.
Okay.
And he's this amazing cello teacher, and she played, 6 to 8 hours a day every day for the entire time she was in college. Graduated and had all these auditions lined up, and then was just like, nah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man.
Stopped.
I'm dealing with that in my own family. I've got a soon to be 16-year-old daughter who is in ballet conservatory, and she eats, breathes, sleeps ballet. And, she was home, conservatory closed down, spring semester. She was home and she was still doing, 6-8 hours a day of ballet. Then her summer break came, and she was like, I got to do private lessons and, a summer program. And, it worries me. I say, you're going to burn yourself out. You're going to get this world-class ballet education. And then when it comes time to actually make your $22,000 a year, right. As a professional ballet dancer, you're going to be fried on it. You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah, no, I do. I mean, there's only so many seats and so many orchestras in America, and the same for professional dancers. It's a funnel, just like college sports to pro sports. And, and I think a lot of people start eyeballing that funnel, and they just don't, like my mom, I don't think had the faith in her own ability. She was incredibly talented, but when you're Appalachian and you're going to auditions, and there are people who were raised in New York City who who's like godfather is the former roommate of Leopold Stokowski or whatever. Like you start to feel, well, you're from the South. You're from Kentucky. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, like, sure I do. Yeah.
There's a certain amount of so are you here to change the air conditioning filters or something? I heard your accent, assumed you were working class. It's just part of being Southern. And for my mom, this was the 70s, and then there was a year where all these people that she had gone through conservatory with died. One guy overdosed, one committed suicide, one was in a drunk driving car accident, and You know, it was the 70s. It was a fairly hedonistic time. People were partying pretty hard, and all of a sudden, man, bam, 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 like 4 or 5 of her friends died all at once. And she was like, I'm going to be a military wife and a mom, and I'm going to stay at home, get my master's in education, and just go be a music teacher.
Yeah.
So I understand the decision. I know it was really hard for her. It was hard for her for the rest of her life. So...
Yeah, man, the shot you don't take is the one you wonder about. I mean, I feel that pressure too. Like I was never willing to sleep in my car to try to make it in the music industry. And so many of my contemporaries did and did, you know what I mean?
I could tell you that the third seat in an Econo line is the one.
For sure, man.
The front 2 seats are bucket. It sucks to sleep in those. And the second one is a little short because the side doors are right there. But the third one, man, you can really stretch out.
Yeah.
If you start feeling like you're getting to the middle of a gig and nobody's popped up for a place to stay, start eyeballing that third seat the second you can get out. That's my winning strategy.
It's very true. And I mean, all those hours of playing Tetris on the Nintendo Game Boy pays off when you start loading the trailer too.
Man, totally. The pack job. Dan Horowitz. So I've been in this band 5'8". I moved to Athens in 89, and by 1990 was in this band 5'8", and I've been in the band off and on. There was a little 9-year lost weekend in the middle there, but I've been back in the band longer than I was in it the first time. Dan Horowitz, the bass player, is the ultimate van pack guy. Like you've never seen anything like it.
Well, and there's, you guys had, I mean, dare I say, you guys came as close to being super huge as you can get without being super huge. I mean, is that a fair statement?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but let me just make sure that people know that I feel like in many ways we dodged a bullet there. But let's back up. So, because that is something I want to get to, but you got to kind of understand where the band came from first. So, yeah. My dad eventually comes back from Vietnam, starts looking for a job, goes into the reserves, and starts teaching college in Columbus, Georgia. So that's where I spent most of my childhood and adolescence. And Columbus is a bare knuckle town. It's a military base and mill town. And then Phoenix City's right across the river. And Phoenix City was the Vegas of the Southeast because all of the soldiers from Benning would go there to gamble and consort with ladies of low reputation and to drink bootleg alcohol during Prohibition and to use illegal drugs. And all of this was under the table, and Phoenix City was a big organized crime town, and there was a lot of violence there. And growing up there, the shadow of that was still sort of very long. And I was just telling somebody last week, I have 2 friends I went to high school with who were on death row still. And the guy that I bought all my drum heads from, who had a music store in Columbus, was shot to death in a coke deal. Like, Columbus was rough. And so I bounced out of there, having already been in a couple of high school bands. It's like, I've always had this duality in my life as a player. I either was like crossing the railroad tracks, going into South Columbus, which is kind of there's a big black middle class in Columbus because of the retired NCO Corps from the military base. And so there was a pretty thriving funk, jazz, blues, R&B scene south of Winton Road in Columbus. South Columbus was predominantly African-American. Lots of gospel, lots of funk, lots of opportunity to play Kool and the Gang covers, Gap Band, Prince. And then north of Macon Road is kind of lily white and has a lot of the baggage of the old South. And so there were a lot of high school punk bands. So I was constantly crossing that, playing both. But all those clubs were pretty gritty. I was a fighter, and was not, just carrying a lot of the weight of the sort of cargo cult of masculinity in America, and got to Athens, Georgia, which is a completely different scene. And wasted a couple of years walking around with my chest thrown out, thinking I was Billy Badass, and Athens wasn't like that. Athens was arty. There's an enormous art school attached to the University of Georgia. Lots of painters, sculptors, writers, poets, people like that were starting bands. Maybe they weren't like the most relentlessly chops-driven musicians, but were creating great art. You know, the B-52s, R.E.M, Guadalcanal Diary, Pylon, the Method Actors. Like, that was the Athens music scene. So it took me a little while to kind of adapt to not being kind of an asshole. And, but I found 5/8, and they were my favorite band before I joined. And they were kind of a power pop punk band at a time when that was really like outsider music. It was before Nirvana broke. And Mike Mantione, the guitar player and singer in 5/8's guitar sounded like Bob Mould from Husker Du, which was my favorite rock band at the time. And I was drawn to that band and loved that band and saw every show. And then their drummer was in this terrible industrial accident. And his leg was crushed by 3,000 pounds of sheetrock, shifted suddenly in a warehouse where they were loading these big pallets of gypsum wallboard. And he got caught and pinned. And his leg was pretty much destroyed. And 5/8 didn't want to stop playing, so they asked me to sub until Mike was better. And then when Mike came back, his heart wasn't really in it. And a couple of months later, he announced that he'd fallen in love with this girl who had auditioned for the band. They were told they needed to add a guitar player. This beautiful girl showed up with a pink Stratocaster, and she wasn't a super great player, but she was absolutely bewitchingly beautiful, and Mike fell for her, and she got a job as a stewardess and moved to Boston to work for Delta, and off Mike went, and I got the gig. So I've been in 5/8 pretty much on and off ever since. So
yeah.
And we did 200 shows a year from 1991 to 1996, just crisscrossing the country.
Well, and you guys, I don't want to put too fine a point on this, but some of my listeners, most of my listeners are obviously geographically fairly close to both of us, but we have listeners, all over the world, quite frankly, and they may not understand when I say the Athens, Georgia music scene during that time, the mid 80s to the mid 90s, maybe not the mid 90s, but in the late 80s, a lot of folks referred to Athens as Seattle of the South because there was so much music coming out of there. True. If you wanted to go start a band in a big city and get some attention, your choices were New York, Nashville, LA, Seattle, Athens, Georgia, maybe Austin, Texas. But it was really just a hotbed of talent coming out of there. And you guys were no exception to that. I mean, reading press from back then, you guys were compared to the Beatles, for Christ's sake.
I'd say that we had as profound a set of pathologies as the Beatles did.
Right on.
It was a pretty intense group of guys. And we had a lot of just an axe to grind with the world, for sure. I don't know what it was about Athens that made it such a successful music scene either. Like, I couldn't put my finger on what exactly was in the water or whatever. But I think that it was just that somebody did it and everyone realized that it was possible. My wife is a professional theater person who's now a theater professor at a historically black college in central Georgia, which is an enormous commute in non-COVID times, but now she's teaching remote. But a lot of her students are first generation college students, and she says to them, "You want to be an actor? Go be an actor. Somebody's got to get paid to do that job. Might as well be you."
Right.
And so she's created a kind of pipeline from her college into the film industry in Atlanta. And a lot of her former students are now either successful actors, or they're working on sets, or they work in post doing editing, because people just have to realize that it's possible. Titus from what's that show about the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So Titus, one of her students.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
This guy, Michael Stiggers, just finished playing Simba on Broadway before COVID happened. That's one of her students. She's taught a lot of incredibly successful actors, and her whole thing is somebody's got to get paid to do it. It might as well be you. So by the time I got to Athens, the B-52s had already been just punted up the pop charts from Athens. And that was just a bunch of art students. Like they weren't, and that was sort of what was the thing that made everybody realize that it was possible, that a bunch of kids, those two girls who sing those incredible, like 2/3 of the Andrews Sisters harmonies, never had a vocal lesson in their lives. They just taught themselves to do that. Ricky Wilson, the guitar player, strung his guitar up with 4 strings, 2 on the bottom tuned to a dyad, 2 on the top tuned to a dyad, and created a whole style of guitar, like a post-surf new wave guitar style. Fred, the singer, he was a journalism major at University of Georgia. And they were like, let's start a band. And they did. And there was dancing was illegal in Athens until sometime in the early 80s. Like they played house parties and in pastures. And they got so good at it that they went to New York City and everybody was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. And people back in Athens were like, I guess I could do that too. So then Limbo District, Method Actors, the La-Di-Das, all these bands sort of sprang up. And Pylon, who, if you haven't heard Pylon, they're just the most amazing distillation of the rhythm section of a band like Television or Can or Noi, like krautrock rhythm section with this wailing banshee singer. And they were this very art brute, amazing band. And then Pylon inspired a bunch of other guys, a painter named Michael, a guy who worked at a record store named Peter, 2 guys that moved up here from Macon, Georgia to be rhythm section named Mike and Bill to start a band. And that's how R.E.M. happened. It just kept happening. There's no explanation for it except that people realized it was possible. And that a lot of these people, artists get this reputation. It's you just want to lie around all day and maybe throw some paint at a canvas and be famous. But the R.E.M. guys played 8 hours a day, every day.
Yeah.
Their work ethic was unbelievable. And so, apply vision, opportunity, and work ethic together, and it's bound to happen. So 5/8 stumbled into that, right?
Yeah.
And we tried to mimic the R.E.M. path to success, which was to just play all the time. So we played 220 shows a year for 5 or 6 years. We had a deal with an Atlanta label. That label got bought out, and we just went on strike. We're not recording a note for this label, and actually got released from our deal, which was unheard of.
It is.
We were so angry at that label. We'd put out 3 records for them. We had sold 10 or 15,000 of our own self-released cassette, just out of the back of the van after shows. And then they put out 3 records and maybe sold 1,000 to 2,000 each. And we were really frustrated with that because we were like, we're doing better than this, and we don't have access to record stores.
Yeah.
So we left that label and we got signed to, there's a guy named Walter Yetnikoff. Some of your listeners will know who that was.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a book called Hitmen about Columbia Records and CBS Records in the 70s and 80s. Walter Yetnikoff was a hitman. And by hitman, I mean he signed Michael Jackson, Bruce Springsteen, The Clash, Elvis Costello. He basically built the Columbia Records empire. And then, he was a wild man. He was impulsive and kind of Dionysian and kind of crazy. And when the Japanese when Sony bought CBS Columbia, I think that's how that worked. Not exactly sure how CBS fits into all that. And I'm sure there's somebody who's a music industry historian, banging on their radio right now, no, you idiot. But eventually Walter Yetnikoff was working for the Japanese, and, Japanese business culture is, for the most part, very formal, very based on respect, based on process. And Walter was a screamer, a desk chair thrower, a thing smasher, and they were like, that's it, out. And so we got signed to Walter Yetnikoff's comeback label called Vel Vel, and we made 1 record for them with the unbelievably gifted producer, Ed Stasium, who had done like every other Ramones record and all the first 3 Talking Heads records, and had produced Motorhead and the Smithereens and like a Keith Richards solo record. And somehow we ended up in the studio with this genius, and we made what I consider to be probably definitely our best sounding record. I think that some of the writing was better on one later record by 5/8, but we did a record with him called Gasolina. And then Vel's wheels came off. That was Vel was Walchietnikov's label, and I don't know exactly what happened. I can't really say. But we went out and we kept touring like we had been, 200 shows, 200 plus. And I just got burned out and left the band. And because they didn't sell any more copies of the record we made with Ed Stasium, which isn't on any streaming services either, which sucks because it's really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, we came right up to the brink. And I think that if Vel had been able to get the record out on time, because people sort of look back and they go, oh, 90s music, like Sugar Ray and Smashing Pumpkins and Nirvana. It's like, when are you ever going to put Sugar Ray, Smashing Pumpkins, and Nirvana in one basket and call it a genre? They're like 3 completely different bands. And we would have fit right in that sort of that year of heavy melodic rock between the time Nevermind came out and Gish, like that was kind of our pocket. And we had a record ready to go, but it sat at Vel for a year and a half. And in that time, things changed, and it kind of the sound moved out west to the roots of the sort of Sublime sound with Sugar Ray and a bunch of RCA bands that had one hit like Vertical Horizon and Lit. And like we kind of got left behind. The kind of confessional power pop, post-punk thing that we did ebbed. And there was more than one radio programmer who quietly confided to the band, like, if this had come out a year and a half ago, I would have added it in a heartbeat, but it doesn't fit with where the station's gone now. So I left the band and started playing sessions, which is funny because I'm such a gorilla behind the kit. Like I'm not sort of standard session guy.
Yeah, ditto, for sure. Well, I mean, during that time though, you could have just told my life story. I mean, seriously, it's almost a carbon copy. I just think it happened for me a couple years after it happened for you. The most successful project I ever played in was Funnel.
No way.
Yeah.
Did I know you were in Funnel? Holy shit.
So 98, we're just a bunch of dumb 20 something kids, one of which happened to go to recording school. We recorded a record in the basement of the house we all lived in. And before we knew it, like we had managers bidding for our services, all these record labels. And then as you said, the Japanese bought all these labels. Right. It was, kind of a consortium of the Seagram's alcohol company, and like one day, we thought we were going to be signed and be on a world tour, just like next week or next month. I mean, it was going to happen. Right. And all of a sudden we couldn't get a return phone call from anybody at any label because they were all fired.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I just did an interview with Brad Wood for my podcast. And while we talked a lot about the shift in the record industry and what happened. And he produced Exile in Guyville for Liz Phair, and then like Veruca Salt, Red Beat, Ben Lee, like this insanely long and deep resume. Moved out to Los Angeles. And so he's had a kind of a front row seat to the change in the music industry. And his whole thing is like, yes, music made a lot of money. And at some point, like investor groups started to think, that if they're making a lot of money, I want a part of that. But record companies aren't like General Motors or Seagram's, as you mentioned, or somewhere there's like a repeatable, predictable revenue model that recurs. Like you buy one Camry, 12 years later you buy another Camry. Bands don't work like that.
No,
record companies don't work like that.
There is no artist development left in the world at all. You know,
Well,
it used to be, you know, back in the olden days. And when I say olden days, I mean like 20 years ago, or 25 years ago. You know, you would start a relationship with an A&R guy at a label, and he would give you advice, and he would say, you know, here's what you guys need to do, you know, or girls, this is what we want to hear. And then you would go back to the drawing board and maybe do a demo, or maybe put out another independent record or whatever. And they would develop you. I mean, hell, you know, Hootie and the Blowfish, not that, you know, there's some, you know, sacred cow, but Mick Casanelli at Atlantic Records made them sell 20,000 copies of their homemade cassette, touring up and down the East Coast before he would give them a deal. And when he did, their debut sold 14 million copies in the first 18 months or something. I mean, it's just great.
Let's be super straight about something important about Hootie and the Blowfish, though. And this is something that 5'8" learned the hard way. Hootie were the nicest fucking guys in rock and roll. I can't find anyone who has a bad word to say about anybody in that band. And I've done 3,000 live shows in my life. I've played every, like, pizza place in Johnson City, Tennessee, to, you know, the Bass Amphitheater in Fort Worth, like, and everything in between. And Hootie are universally loved, like, top to bottom. And I don't just mean industry people. I mean club owners. I mean girls that have had one night stands with members of the band, like, oh, he was so nice. You know?
Yeah, I do.
And that's important. Yeah. Because when it comes down to, like, people who work at record labels have X hours in the day, right? They're going to be there for 8 hours. They're going to spend an hour at lunch. So now we're down to 7 hours. They're going to spend 3 hours in meetings. So, like, the day is just getting chipped away. You know, they smoke, they take another 2 hours off the clock. So there's like this tiny window where they're going to have time to work, and they're going to make a choice between your record and Hootie's record. Yeah. The Hootie guys were here last week, and they brought everybody donuts. And they didn't do it because they were like trying to grease the wheels. They did it because the guys at Hootie are nice fucking guys.
Right.
And
right.
So you're like, all right, I got to call these 10 radio stations. Am I going to talk about, I don't know, let's talk about a band we know have been really shitty to people, like 5'8". Are they going to talk about 5'8", or are they going to talk about Hootie, who brought donuts? You know, 5'8".
So true.
We didn't understand what our job was. We didn't understand what everybody else's job was. We thought, all right, we're going to produce great art, and people are going to fall at our feet and want to sell it for us. And you know what? It's not how it works.
No, sadly, it's not. And, you know, I mean, I can't remember who said it, but I saw this on a documentary years ago. But, you know, somebody said, you know, the difference between the Beatles and Kiss, okay? And I can't remember who it was and how this got set up, but they said the Beatles wanted to make the greatest record possible. Kiss wanted to sell as many records as possible. So I don't know which one is the winning strategy. You know what I'm saying? Because not everybody can release the friggin' White Album, man. You know?
Yeah, I say cross the streams and be R.E.M. Be the nicest band that sells the most records.
Yeah. But, you know, so many bands don't do that because for somebody that's never played in a band, it's impossible for you, for me, for anybody to explain this. But, you know, in my case, there were 5 members in the band. It was a 5-way marriage.
It's always a 5-way marriage, 4-way marriage, 3-way marriage. That's it's give and take. And the thing is if one person says no, everybody's got to say no.
Right. But you have that constant, you know, interagency, you know, bickering that goes on. Like, you know, who wrote more of this song? You know, are we sharing the publishing 5 ways, or is it, you know, the singer and the guitarist get 80% and the rest of us split the 20%. I mean, everything was a discussion. And especially
if you're the wheel every day.
Right. And if you're living in a small metal box with those people, Yes. In our case, it was, I think it was a 1990 Dodge Caravan or Plymouth Voyager or something like that, but it was a minivan and we were living in that damn thing together. Yeah. You know what? If you open your mouth the wrong way towards me on a good day, it's probably going to rub me a little bit. And then you throw in, alcoholism, possible drug abuse. Holy shit, man. That's a powder keg just waiting to blow up at all times.
I love the term creative differences because it carries so much weight. Like it does a lot of heavy lifting because you and I both know that when a band breaks up because they had quote creative differences, like that discussion is really about the fact that they just hated each other at the end.
Right. Yeah. Creative differences is a nice way to say the bass player's a dick all the time.
Right. The myth that almost killed me in that first decade of 5/8 was that it was supposed to be fun all the time. And it's not fun all the time. And yeah, it beats going to a day job. Don't get me wrong. I'm not complaining, but there are days when it's the hardest job in the world because there's no rule book or playbook or plan that you can follow. We thought we're going to duplicate R.E.M's path to success. We're going to play everywhere. And that's what we did. But the stars didn't align for us like it did for R.E.M. And I played with Mike Mills and we were having this conversation one day and I said, I just don't think the 5/8 was as good a band as R.E.M. And he whipped around. He was like, number one, those are just stupid comparisons to make because there's no way to quantify 5/8 had, 450 tons of good, whereas R.E.M. had 700 tons of good. Like there's no way to measure that, but it really is about timing and luck. And you could say, yes, 5/8 flirted with, quote, the big time. It came very close to becoming like a band on the cover of Rolling Stone or Spin magazine. Yeah. But I'm super grateful for everything that we did have, and I don't have any real regrets because I was like a little bit of a monster in that first decade of 5/8. I was out of control in a lot of ways. And if I'd been handed a big pile of cash, man, it's just fortunate I was on a short leash with the amount of powder drugs I was able to buy.
Well, you said we kind of dodged a bullet, and I say that to people all the time as well. Funnel got together and did our first gig in 8 years this time last year. It was almost a year ago to the day. I think it's, a year and a week ago. We did a show first time in 8 years and the whole world showed up for that. And it was great. Yeah. And I heard at least 200 times that night, man, it's a shame you guys didn't make it. And I kept thinking to myself, as somebody that's fairly early in my sobriety in the grand scheme of things, I thought to myself, God, had we made it, I would have come home in a bag for sure.
Yeah.
So it's, a lot of young musicians think if I just get a record deal, all my problems will be over. And I've said this so many times, that's exactly when the problems begin because you've got accountants and the meters running, so to speak. You owe somebody else money.
Right. And they could start fucking with your vision. They could start saying things, I don't hear a single.
It'd be cool if you guys could wear leather pants,
Right. But, that guy just spent $500,000 so that you can make a record. So if he says, put on some leather pants, you're like, okay, like calfskin or like sheepskin or, whether you really wanted to wear leather pants in your entire life or not. Now the man who wrote the big check is like, leather pants, motherfucker, put them on.
That's right. That's right. And you become beholden to that corporate entity that's trying to pay the shareholders at the end of the quarter. And
totally. It's
bad. Not to, I don't want to abruptly transition this conversation, but okay. I want to be respectful of your time, but I feel that it's really important that we talk a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah.
I have never, to my knowledge, had another podcaster on the show to talk about their podcast. But what you're doing is such a unique take on the music industry. And what you're doing is so important with, Crash and Ride podcast that I wanted you to kind of talk to me about the decision to start the podcast. What was the catalyst for it? And tell my listeners what your podcast is trying to tackle with each episode.
Well, so the Crash and Ride podcast is a long-form interview podcast where I talk to musicians who struggle with anxiety, depression, addiction, or trauma. Because, I mean, the real story, like, I can tell you that, oh yeah, I've always wanted to do this lofty thing, but it's not true. Like, the truth is that I have two other drummers in my life who I love as much as I love the breath in my own lungs. And they're millennial, a little younger than me. And they're both struggling with depression. And, the one thing I've learned through the course of getting better myself from my own battles with depression and anxiety and trauma is that I don't believe in advice. I think that when people give advice, they're either talking to their past or future selves, or they're trying to control your behavior. But I just don't like when someone says to me, you know what I think you should do, I just stop listening. Partially because I'm hard-headed, but also because I had someone in my life from the very beginning who was always telling me what to do, and it really didn't have anything to do with what was good for me. So I believe that people should share their experience, strength, and hope, not advice.
Yeah.
And so rather than go to these two people I loved so much, and I was so worried for, and I still worry a little bit because, we're not in a place where people just bounce out of depression just as a society right now. I thought I'm going to assemble a chorus of voices that says, this is what it was like. This is what happened. This is what it's like now. So they could have that vision for a path out the same way that everybody saw, the B-52s bought some guitars, bought a decent set of drums, went to New York and became world famous. I wanted them to see that it was possible and know that it could get better because, man, when you're down in that hole, when you're depressed and you're struggling, it just feels like there are no happy days left in your life. And that's how people end up smoking a 38. They feel like there's no good days left and there's no reason to keep going. And I've just, from my own experience, I know that it gets better.
Yeah, man, I get, I get choked up when you say that because I was there once, you know what I mean? And just it took me so long. And, now I waste a lot of my energy. I feel regretful for all the stuff I screwed up, mm-hmm. and that's a waste of time. And I know that, but you can't help but go, man, in my case, I was an alcoholic and, mm-hmm. I felt like there was nothing good left. There may be a good day out there, but I'm going to spend half that day down in pints of Guinness.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just such a, man, if you've never been there, it's hard to put into words, but it's just you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. You can be having the best day ever. Everything's going perfect, but the whole day you're I'm just waiting for a gorilla to jump out of the tree and rip my head off.
For me, it was just, I'm waiting for an opportunity to fuck this up and hurt somebody.
Right.
The pattern that I kept finding ways to just wreck other people's lives because I was a human tornado. And I just became, in my own mind, this basically I was the other shoe and I was going to drop on somebody else's day and ruin it. But, one of the wisest people I know said to me one time, man, guilt is trying to control the past and anxiety is trying to control the future.
Yeah, man. I
was just whoa, okay. I'll go think about that. And when I start to have like deep regrets, if there's an amends I need to make, I try to make it as soon as possible. If it's like, except when to do so would injure them or others. But if I can't, man, I just have to turn it over and let go of it,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, the sharing the experience, strength, and hope, it is a very powerful tool. And when I listen to your show, the thing that I'm overcome with, no matter who you're talking to on the show, the thing that overwhelms me is this is not scripted. This is, this is not reality TV, quote unquote reality TV. Mm-hmm. These are, two human beings, sharing their souls. And it's amazing to me that you can get people to open up that way to you for the whole world to listen to. And, I said to you, just think of this interview as a cool hour-long drum hang, and we're just going to let everybody listen to it. Mm-hmm. To apply my logic to your show, it's like, just talk about all the worst shit in your life for an hour, and we'll let everybody listen to it. You know what I mean?
I don't know why I'm so lucky that people are willing to open up to me so much, but there's a couple of early episodes. Episode 5 with a friend of mine, Grant Curry, who is a bass player at Pleasure Club. It has a new thing going too that I'll be talking about on my show as soon as they put anything out. But him, my friend Evan Rowe, Dave Pajo from Slint just a few weeks ago, like those guys just like sat down in front of a microphone and just opened a vein. And I was just like, man, I have to respect this moment so much, because it's not something that people do every day, and it's not something I will ever take lightly. The amount of trust people show me on my show sometimes I just find astonishing. Yeah.
Well, it's such a cool show. I'm encouraging all of my listeners, go find the Crash and Ride podcast, subscribe, thumbs up, all the stuff that I ask you to do every week for this show. Do that for Patrick's show, because if, share it with a friend, if it can help anybody, it's really important. I mean, it's really, really important. So, I'm going to send all my folks your way as much as I possibly can, because it is such a powerful interview. And, everybody that listens to this show, I make the assumption is a musician, and these are not isolated cases amongst musicians. We all have some sort of baggage that we got to deal with.
Well, man, like the tool of our trade is emotion.
Right.
Like music is just emotion made concrete. And so just the act of writing together is a high level of emotional vulnerability. Number one, normal people probably aren't cut out for that. So first of all, like we're stepping into the ring a little different. But beyond that, now you move this incredibly vulnerable, volatile, emotional thing into the public sphere, where the guy who hasn't kissed a girl in 30 years who writes for the local alternative weekly can be like, this sucks, I hate it. Like, like there's some guy with like dandruff on his leather trench coat who writes for the local punk rock fanzine, and he's going to be like, I feel like this is inauthentic. Like, yeah, nice sword collection, asshole. Like
it's like the first guy that listened to our record in '98 and said, they sound just like Matchbox 20. I almost hung myself that day.
Right. Because you've made yourself vulnerable. And like there are people out there for whom there's a tremendous amount of like envy that you're even in that position, and they're looking for any opportunity to tear you down.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah.
And add to that, like, 150 days on the road where you're getting like 4 to 4.5 hours of sleep a night, and you're broke, and you're already like ready to choke your bass player with a shoelace when he's trying to sleep. Like, just the level of anxiety and depression that kind of pops up in that environment is depressed musicians are like, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting 3 of them, you know? So I feel like when I first told my dad I'm doing this podcast where I talk to musicians who struggle with anxiety and depression, he was like, do you think, are there enough, like, you're going to be able to find enough guests? I'm like, Dad.
Spoken like a true military man, right?
Yeah. Well, my dad's been depressed one time in his entire life, and that's a crazy story. But he had 2 different doctors prescribe 2 different medications, and he called me at like 1:00 in the morning, like, what is happening? I feel so weird. I've never been sad like this in my life. And I was like, okay, let's just start at the beginning. Like, what's going on? He's like, well, I had a little minor outpatient operation and I've got the flu. So one doctor gave me pain meds and one doctor gave me cough medicine. I was like, okay, pick one. You know, you can't do both of those. But I'm in a target-rich environment. Like, I will always have musicians to talk to, and I just hope. Like, I have 2 rules. Like, every musician who comes on my show, I send them an MP3 before it ever airs, and I go, listen to this. Make sure there's nothing in there you want to take out, because I never want anybody to come on my show and say something and then regret having been on the show.
Yeah.
You know? Also, the other thing is, I never want anybody to come on my show and feel judged. So there's certain people, you know, who will never be on my show because I hate them. You know?
Right.
And I don't ever want anybody to come on the show and be like, wow, I hope he doesn't rake me over the coals like he did that one dude, you know? So, it's, if you've heard anybody on my show, I'm a fan. You know, like, there's a music to other people's lives that I find incredibly inspiring. And when they get on a microphone, I'm like, sing your song, man. Tell your truth. Like, be here now. And when I used to have people at my house before COVID, you know, right before we sat down, if they were coffee drinkers, I'd hand them a double espresso. And right before I hit record, I'd say, hey, remember, you may be tempted to protect someone in your background who was an abuser or someone who was unkind to you, but if you tell the truth, you might save a life. Okay, welcome to Crash and Ride.
Oh man, no doubt. That's no pressure, right?
Right, but I mean, you know, the combination of, you know, 40 milligrams of caffeine and the big flashing red light. People tell the truth, and it's been an amazing ride.
Yeah, man. Well, it's a great show. I mean, truly it is, and I think it's so important, you know, I always, you know, the problem with drunks is the world revolves around them, right? So I'm still, you know, a drunk. I haven't had a drink in almost 3 years, but I always apply everything to me. And I think to myself, gosh, I probably could have stopped drinking earlier had I heard all this stuff, had I read all this stuff. And, you know, but I wasn't seeking it out either. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I was immune to the counsel of others when I was using it.
Exactly. But, you know,
that's my grandma used to say, you can't tell that boy nothing.
That's right. That's right. Until you can. And then the boy's willing to learn fast, hopefully. Yeah. You know?
Well, you know, you get that point where you're like, okay, I give up. I don't know how to live my life. Tell me how to live.
Yeah. Pretty much.
I don't do that on my show, by the way. Once again, I'm not a big advice guy, but I'll tell you what my experience was like, or I'll listen to yours. I can tell you that I can say for certain that there was one person who heard the first episode of the show, and because he was a 5/8 fan, and was like, I always say it like someone's listening on the radio, but nobody listens on radios. But he was metaphorically grabbing his radio going, no, I thought I was the only person who felt this way.
Yeah.
And that first episode came out as I was driving to South by Southwest. Like, I posted it from like a Shoney's or something near the Wi-Fi. And this guy like showed up at a 5/8 show at South by Southwest in 2019 and said, hey, I wanted to make a donation to your podcast. And I was like, I got a Patreon page. You could do like a $5 or $10 like recurring he was like, no, I want to give you like money now. I don't want to fuck with that. And I was like, okay, well, let me just set up a PayPal. He's like, no, take this. And he handed me $500 in cash. Just boom.
Wow.
Like, yeah. And then, like, that's what started happening. People were just like, it's been a ride, man. Like, I've been okay during quarantine because people support the podcast, both through the Patreon page and through advertising. But
that's amazing, man.
I've got
really
some kind of super donors who throw down because, so that same guy, struggled his whole life, thought he was the only one, felt really alone in his head and really sad all the time and anxious all the time. And he started like a course of SSRIs, which didn't really work. And I think he had messed with that a little bit in the past, but just given up and just thought, I'm going to white knuckle my way through this because none of that works for me. And then I had my friend Evan Rowe on. I think that's episode 10. And he talked up, and that's a dark episode, man. For the first 2/3 of that episode, I thought, this guy's using my podcast as a suicide note. He's going to go home and kill himself. And I was actually like thinking, I have to dial 911 surreptitiously in the middle of this interview because this guy is in such a dark place. Because he was talking about how SSRIs had failed him and talk therapy had failed him. And he had been doing electroconvulsive therapy where they like put, like one flew with a cuckoo's nest, where they like put the electrodes on your body and shock the hell out of you, trying to squeeze just a little bit of serotonin like out of your cerebral cortex. Mm-hmm. And it had stopped working. And that was literally like destroying his body. But it was the only thing that was keeping him going, and it had stopped working. And I thought, oh God, this is going to have the darkest ending. And then he said, but there's an experimental trial thing happening at Duke University, I think it is, in their outpatient thing where they do an infusion using ketamine, which is a veterinary tranquilizer that's been used as a club drug.
Yeah.
But it's titrated at such a mild dose that you're not actually intoxicated, but it alleviated all of his suicidal ideation after the first treatment.
Wow. And
he kept going back, and like his life became normal, but it's expensive to go sit in like what is basically this sort of like one of these chemotherapy places where they put a needle in your arm and they put an IV bag up and they start the drip. And so he was talking about that. Well, this guy, the guy who was my first like mega donor, heard that, went to his doctor, said, I want to do this ketamine thing. And the doctor was like, well, we don't have a clinic here in Austin where you can go get the IV, but we're doing a nasal spray now. So let's try that. Same results. So doing the ketamine nasal spray. And so like saved a life, like these two guys. And then, my friend Evan eventually moved to the nasal spray, and it's just like, it's helping. Like the fact that my podcast is helping people blows my mind. But like, quarantine happened, man. I fell off for like 2 months. I didn't put out any episodes because I was just like, how do I do this? How do I interview people if I can't have them in my home? How do I have these frank conversations where I drop F-bombs and talk about like drug use when my daughter's here 24 hours a day? She's only 10,
Yeah.
And but people started texting me like, hey man, could sure use a crash and write episode right about now. Like, I need to know that I'm not the only one who's at the bottom of this like quarantine crater. And so, and I shook off the torpor and like started doing this over the phone. And I'm back, man. I'm doing 2 episodes this week. I'll probably do 2 next week. So
that's great, man. I mean, it's fantastic. On the drumming front, I mean, obviously nobody can go, really do too much right now, but mm-hmm. You said you were supposed to be in Europe right now. If all this breaks free, I mean, what's on the horizon for you? Are you making any plans, or are you just kind of playing it, one day at a time and figure out where we're at?
Well, last year, I was out with Mike Mills and Chuck Leavell. Mike Mills, of course, bass player of R.E.M. Chuck Leavell is fucking Chuck Leavell, Rolling Stones,
yep.
Allman Brothers. I don't know if that, we did a string of dates a couple of weeks. I don't know if that's going to become a regular thing or not. I don't know if it does if I'm going to be part of that band, because it was just, it was a contract thing, and I had a really good time, but I'm not really like an Allman Brothers kind of drummer, and the songs are really hard for me. There may be a guy out there who's more suited for that job. So I don't know. That's a big question mark. 5'8", we're going to continue to play. We've started writing a new record. Pinky Doodle Poodle. God, I hope we get some time on the road before their visa expires again. Or I hope that they find somebody and marry them so they can stay in the States or whatever, Well, because they're such a great rock and roll band. They're like one of the greatest rock and roll bands I've ever seen. And there's not a rock and roll scene in Japan. So when they're there, like I think George works at a guitar shop, and Yuria, I don't know what she does. I think she does some acting and writes music for commercials and stuff. But like when they're here, they're this rock and roll powerhouse, like this almost like, the 60s had all the R&B reviews where like it was a show.
Yeah,
like,
sure. Yeah.
You'd see Sam and Dave and Booker T and the MGs and maybe like Aretha or Al Green or something like on one bill. And it would be this like a show where it would build to this big climax. And like, that's like a Pinky Doodle Poodle show. Like George and Yuria have studied the great performances of James Brown and great rock bands like AC/DC and Sweet, and George loves that 70s rocks, like what my ex-girlfriend used to call butt rock. And man, he's just the greatest. Like we played one show in Nashville and he got into Guitar Player magazine like overnight. Bam, he's that good. So yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm making a lot of new relationships with Crash and Ride. I've met a lot of great musicians, and there's been some like, hey, we should do something, So there may be like, a whole band full of sad dudes out on the road at some point.
Oh man, that's like funny.
A Crash and Ride All Stars. I talked about my plan for South by Southwest this year was to do a showcase with all bands who had at least one member who'd been on Crash and Ride, and that would have been an incredible showcase.
Sure, it would. Yeah, man. I mean, you've had a who's who, man. It's unbelievable. So if you do put together something, I'm a pretty good drum tech. I mean, I can tune really well. So
you're in.
Yeah, just keep me in.
What I need is someone to hang out and enjoy music. Like, are you thinking like just? Oh, you mean to tour with us? Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, man, I'll polish your kit up every day, have them tuned up. Man, you don't have to do anything. It'll be great.
Man, I can't believe we've talked for almost an hour and we haven't even talked about snare drums yet. That's crazy.
I know. Well, see, that's the cool thing about the drum shuffle is I have people back all the time. I had Kevin Charney on twice now, and he's Kevin Charney. You know what I'm saying?
Amazing drummer.
He's
amazing drummer.
Great guy.
Let me tell you what it's like to record it, because I've also been an audio engineer and had a studio for a while. And Kevin Charney is the most frustrating drummer to record in the world because his bands always show up and do everything in one take. How do studios charge?
Yeah, by the
hour.
Yeah.
Right. And they're in and out in like 2 hours. It's almost not even worth it. That guy is such a professional. Man, I want to brag about my main kit just a little bit.
Yeah, please, man. Tell us about it. I'm guessing it's going to be some quality vintage stuff.
Man, so I've always been a vintage guy because I couldn't afford new. Like back in the 90s, they were just still old drums. And so my first vintage kit was this set of early 50s Radio Kings I picked up at a music store, Highland Music in Cleveland, Ohio. We played with a band called Cop Shoot Cop, which is a New York City noise rock band. The next day I walked into this music store in Cleveland and saw a bunch of like Stag percussion and all that sort of import stuff that was all down on the floor, but up on a shelf, like shoved to the back, I saw some kind of like slightly yellowed white marine pearl. And I was like, hey buddy, I want to see that kit. He's like, come back tomorrow. Drum guy's out sick today. And I was like, man, I'm going to be in Youngstown in 5 hours. So I see that kit now, or I never see it. He pulled it down. And as he was pulling it down, I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. And it was 22, 13, 16, and 14 by 6 Radio King snare drum. And I was like, man, what do you take for these? And he goes, I don't know, what do these things cost? And there was a set of like Stag percussion or jugs or one of those like Chinese import kits sitting there marked $295. And he said, I don't know, give me $250. And
Done.
like my bass player almost barked in shock. And I just shot my elbow into his ribs and I was like, I don't know, man. These drums are really old. Like, I could give you 200. So I got that first vintage kit for 200. And I kept that kit for, I toured the rest of the 90s on that kit and into the 2000s. But then I played some punk rock gigs and a lot of beer got thrown. And I thought, I don't want to destroy this kit. And then I was out kind of hunting for another kit and drove by a church yard sale. And I had like my vintage drum radar started tingling, and I pulled in, and there was a set of blue sparkle Cleveland Rogers for $20. 22,
oh my God.
12, 16 with a power tone, gold blue sparkle snare. Played that for a few years, but now, a few years ago, a buddy of mine in San Francisco was like, "Hey, you like these old Ludwigs, right?" And it was a set of the Thermogloss early 70s maple interior, clear interior kit, and I was like, yes, I like those a lot. And so he picked it up off Craigslist and shipped it to me. And as it was on its way across the country, the drummer from the Archers of Loaf contacted me. He had a stainless steel Ludwig kit. And I was playing in like the loudest noise rock band in America at that point, a band called the Powder Room. And so I was like, he was selling the stainless kit. So short story long, I sold the Thermogloss kit before I'd ever played it. Like, I called a buddy, there's a studio here. He had a house kit, another 3-ply Ludwig kit, but it was the Cortex wrapped butcher block kit. And I said, I have your new house drum kit on its way to my house right now because I got to pay Mark from Archers of Loaf for the stainless kit. And he was like, I don't need a kit. I've got a kit. I was like, I don't think you understand. And gave him the hard sell. The box came to my house. I took it to his studio. We unpacked it there, put the heads on it, tuned it up, hit it a few times. He bought it. I walked away, bought the stainless kit, and then immediately the Powder Room broke up. So I didn't dig the stainless Ludwigs. You know, like they were incredibly loud, but the thing I was looking for wasn't there. And then we bought a house really cheap, and it had a really shitty electric stove, and I don't know how to cook on electric. So I bought a stainless steel gas stove, installed a stainless steel Ludwig kit to pay for it. And then I went to that dude's studio and played that Thermogloss kit. And I thought, I have made a terrible mistake.
Yeah, the one that got away.
I was like, sell me this kit. He was like, no way. I was like, I'll pay you more than you paid for it. I know what you paid for it. He's like, this is my Cold Dead Hands kit. You're never getting this Thermogloss kit from me. I don't know if you've ever played a set of Thermogloss Ludwigs. They came in 2 finishes, a sort of blonde maple and then a fake walnut, which is really beautiful as it ages in. It kind of wears through a little bit, and it gets this kind of, it almost looks like a Tobacco Sunburst guitar that's been relicked. It's so beautiful. But this was the blonde maple Thermogloss kit. It's the thinnest finish Ludwig ever put on a set of drums, and they sound unbelievable. Everything you want from 3-ply Ludwigs, but like a wide open shell, no wrap, and I played that kit on a session and was just like, I have to have these drums. And he was like, no, so do I. And they're mine, so fuck off. So I put out an APB to all my dudes that hunt vintage drum kits, and another buddy of mine popped up with a 24, 12, 13, 16 Ludwig Thermogloss kit, 3-ply, early 70s.
Nice.
Gave me a great deal on it. And I sent the toms out to Chris Hewer at Hewer Drumworks in Los Angeles to do all the edges for me, because they were, 70s drums. Somebody at some point played them with no bottom heads, and they banged against the lugs on the kick drum. You know what happens.
Oh, sure.
But they came back, and those toms sound almost like piano keys. They're so bell-like and clear and perfect. And I play that kit 90% of the gigs I play, but every now and then, if I'm going to do like a string of punk rock shows, like where I'm playing and like, let's shove these pool tables back so we can have a rock show, that kind of thing, where I don't know where we're going to be staying, if it's going to be secure. If I lost that Thermogloss kit, it would be the end of the world. So my friend Jake Kreger, who was the first guest on Crash and Ride, and who also is kind of the de facto producer of the show, lives in a tiny apartment in Alexandria, and he had a set of 3-ply early 70s black Cortex Ludwigs, just the kick of the floor, 18-inch floor, 24-inch kick. And you know, man, the 24-inch 3-ply Ludwig kick drum is like unobtainium. Like they're impossible to find.
Yep.
And now I have 3 of them, but that's a whole other story. But he said, look, I can't keep this kit. I'll sell it to you cheap. We made a deal. And then I just filled out the kit. So now I have this black Cortex kit. And that Cortex, man, is bulletproof. Like you could throw beer at it all day long. Singer can jump on it. You can get, I mean, I would never tour without cases, but you know, it's durable stuff.
That's an embarrassment of riches right there, man.
Man, I haven't even gotten into my round badge kit, but that's a whole other, that'll be when I come back.
Well, so the burning question for me, you know, you had a stainless kit, and, you know, I've played on one of those a couple of times, but the thing that stuck out to me with the stainless kit, not only how loud they are, but man, you've got to have a forklift to move those things around. They're heavy.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm 6'1" and 220 when I'm healthy, you know.
Yeah.
I'm a big dude. So yeah.
I just wouldn't want to, you know, have to haul those things around. You know, some of these clubs that have, you know, you're playing on the second floor, you know, up the stairs. Man, no way with that kit. No way.
Yeah. I mean, I use those SKB cases with the, they replace the foam lining with almost like a little pillow. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know what that lining's called, but I love it because, you know, the foam eventually breaks down in those cases, and then you're like, you know, trying to blow like lint off your drums every time you unpack them. But those cases are heavy, and you put a 24-inch kick drum in the case they have for a 24-inch, even if it's like 3-ply, like light as air, like it weighs as much. It's like dragging your dead grandma in and out of a club every night, you know?
Right.
So you put a 24-inch stainless kick drum in there. It's brutal.
Yeah. I mean, that's some real heft, but I mean, you know, the vintage thing, I mean, what we need to do is we need to get you back. You know, Charney and I are threatening to get with Josh Touchton from Ludwig, who is a known vintage drum geek, you know, like all of us. We've been talking about doing a round table where it's just like, it'll be pure comedy, I'm sure, but it'll be like, you know, draw a subject out of a hat and then everybody debate it for 10 minutes, right? Like
oh man, I would love that.
Like the lightning round of Jeopardy or something. I don't know, but we've been talking about this for, I can't tell you how long. We're just going to have to include you on that. So, I
mean, the thing is that I don't think there's a single thing about drums that I disagree with Kevin Charney about.
Now, come on now. I mean,
maybe like he had a real affection for heads other than Remo for a long time.
Yeah.
And I've just always used coated Remo, either reverse stop, Emperor, or Ambassador, pretty much exclusively. And I could never get the hang of other. I did one time. I had a kit that was oversized. You know, that happens with vintage drums a lot. And I got some of those Aquarians. Yeah. I guess they're called not modern vintage, but they've got modern vintage is something vintage, but I can't remember. And put it on a 14x6 Gretsch snare drum I had, and it was just the most ridiculously great snare drum sound fucking all time. And a part of me is like, should I start messing with Aquarian heads? Because that was such a great sounding, but it's such a thin, crisp head, and I hit like an orangutan. And so I dented the head pretty bad and just kind of went right back to Emperors. But that snare sound has always kind of haunted me. I thought if I end up doing a record with someone like Butch Vig or Brad Wood or Ed Stasium again, I'll probably bring 6 of those Aquarian modern
right
heads
on.
and just burn through them, you know, because they sound so good.
Well, I mean, my years of experimentation with heads, you know, I'm a cheap bastard. I don't like to replace heads until I have to replace heads. You know what I mean? Like,
no, I do.
I've got some snare drums that have had the same head on for like 5 years now. You know, how many
kits do you own?
I think I've got 4 now. Yeah, that's right. I've got 4 kits. You know, one is, you know, the A kit, the one I take out and play shows with and all that. Then I've got, you know, the first kit I ever owned. It's still sitting out at my buddy's studio, and he kind of uses it as house kit. Then I've got a Ludwig kit that I keep here at the house. You know, and then I've got like the super uber duper special kit that, you know, usually just case queens, you know, I'll pull them out for sessions occasionally, but,
case queen.
I just don't like changing heads. What I
was going to say is, so you got 4 kits, right?
Yeah.
And it takes, if you do top and bottom, front and back on the kick drum heads, that's about $250. Maybe a little shy of $250.
Yeah.
That's $1,000 to change all those heads in one go.
Yeah, man.
That's a non-trivial amount of money for a working musician.
That is correct. But, you know, so I just don't do it as often as I should, probably. If I haven't divoted the head, you know, if the coating is still on there, I'm good with it. And I was always a Remo guy, but when I switched to coated heads, right? When I started really liking the coated heads, the Remo coating comes off quick for me. And I don't know if it's how I play or if it's the sticks I use or what, but, you know, I'd put a coated Ambassador on a snare drum and all the coating would be gone in a month, you know? And
you know, that used to happen to me too, but it hasn't happened in the last few years. And I'm wondering if they changed the formulation at some point.
Yeah, and maybe I need to try them again. But, you know, I switched over to Evans, and, you know, I'm not endorsed by anybody, you know, as far as heads are concerned. And I've really had good luck with the Evans holding up for a long, long time. So, you know, I'm one of those guys, I'm really anal retentive. So I keep a head library, you know, in my spot, you know, so like I've got an extra of everything I could possibly need. And if I pull one out and use it, I order that head, right? Just to replace it in my library. So I'm always prepared. Sure. You know, and I've just had a lot of good luck with them, but maybe I should try the Remo again. I don't know. You know, it's
when you're touring, do you carry an extra kick drum head with you?
Typically not. Because, you know, I can honestly say to you, I have only busted 1 kick drum head in a show in my life. And we're talking 30 years of playing. Yeah. And
I go through 1 a year.
Yeah. So, I mean, I typically don't, because if you do, you duct tape it, you gaff tape it, and you go buy one the next day. Right.
Yeah. I got caught out one time on Pinky Doodle Poodle tour. We were playing with a band called the Molise, another Japanese band in Buffalo. And I used the red ball wooden beater with a slam patch, Fallon patch, on the batter side of the kick drum head. But even that will eventually give way when you're giving it the kind of pounding that kick drum gets. And, it broke in the middle of the Molise set. I felt terrible, but I always have in my case, I have an extra head because nothing will stop a rock show like a broken kick drum.
That's right.
And so I've always got another, and it's not always identical. Sometimes it's just another like head that I had around that's the right size, just so I can get to the end of the show. I always have a drop snare on stage. I have an extra snare, and I always have an extra kick drum pedal. Because if I can limp through a show with a cracked cymbal. I can limp through a show with a broken tom head, but you can't really play without a snare, a kick, and a kick pedal. Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, typically on this show, I know you're not a fan of advice, but we typically ask our guests for a good piece of advice. But so let's you and I agree that the piece of advice is when you go play a gig, have an extra kick drum pedal with you and have an extra snare with you. Because if you bust your snare drum head, you can't say, hey guys, give me 8 minutes.
Right.
You just can't do it, you know?
Right. So I'm willing to do it if I bust a kick drum head. I'll be like, just, you know, do an acoustic song or something. But to be able to just reach down, grab another snare drum. And I've got an embarrassment of riches when it comes to snare drums. You know, I've got a 6.5 Black Beauty, 6.5 Hammered Bronze, and either one of those I'll play a show on. So that's my like number 1 and number 2. And it just depends on what mood I'm on this week, which one's on the snare stand first. But, you know, I just it's unbeatable. Those two snare drums could do just about anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a huge Ludwig fan too. You know, I mean, I've got Supras, I've got, you know, Copperphonics, I've got Black Beauties, you know, and any of them are great. You know, my A is typically the Copperphonic. I just love it. It has all the best qualities of a Supra and a Black Beauty, and none of the bad ones in my opinion, you know.
Here's my secret weapon. And this is something that I do on a lot of sessions that are not like heavy rock sessions, but anything where I need like a Muscle Shoals sound. I watched that Muscle Shoals documentary front to back 5 times, like freeze framing every shot of Roger Hawkins.
Yeah.
Until I finally saw it. He plays a 5-inch Supra with a calfskin head. I saw the Ludwig white calf logo stamped on the head. And I went hunting through all my stuff until I found a 14-inch calfskin head, threw it on my 5-inch Supra. Bam. Instant Aretha Franklin snare.
Yeah.
Instant.
Yeah.
So,
you know, I have tried to get Roger on this show multiple times, and he's kind of a shy guy from what I gather. Doesn't really like talking about himself, but I was told that his hearing now is in such a state he can't really do a phone interview, you know, which is terribly sad to me. But they, you know, the folks at the Muscle Shoals Music Foundation have said, if you're going to be in town, let us know and we'll try to set that up for you, which is really super cool. I haven't had the occasion to be back in Muscle Shoals since I've started this show.
He's such a brilliant drummer.
Yeah,
I've heard that his tinnitus is severe enough that. Do you say tinnitus or tinnitus?
I've always said tinnitus.
Me too. I think that might be the redneck way of saying it. I've had several.
It fits me then.
Tinnitus. Yeah, I mean, you know, I've got so much south in my mouth, man. I just can't even, you know, I've started saying tinnitus because there's still, you know, you have that thing where you don't want to stick out as the country guy, but I'm the country guy.
Yeah, I am too, man. The first 12 years of my life, I lived on a dairy farm, so it doesn't get much more dirt country than that. You know what I'm saying? So,
well, I do, man.
But,
right around the corner, Dick Smith, when I was growing up, he had 47. It's a small operation, but he had, you know, automatic milkers, and he had about 200 acres of grazing. You know, when you're a dairy farmer, you're really a grass farmer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true too. And I've tried to explain it to folks that don't understand, but there is no vacation day. There is no sick day when you have cows to milk. There's no such thing as a day off in the life of a dairy farmer. No, you can't get a pet sitter to come in and hook up those milking machines, you know, like that's not how that works. No, you can't take your 60 Holsteins to the kennel for the weekend. You can't. Cannot do it. So, man, I just imagine pulling up to Pawtropolis with a big old dually with a livestock trailer. Like, yeah, those people would be waving you off probably with guns. You know, that ain't happening here. But well, listen, man. On that note, again, I do want to be respectful of your time. We've got to have you back to do this again. Been great. Yeah, I've enjoyed this so much. Been such a super cool drum hang. I'm once again, I'm just going to say for my listeners, go check out the Crash and Ride podcast. The website is crashandridepodcast.com. Patrick, thank you so much for doing this. I certainly appreciate it. And let's do it again real soon. Okay. I'm looking forward to it. All right, brother. Have a great evening, man. You too, Jamie. All right, guys and girls, that's going to wrap up episode 114 of the Drum Shuffle podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We simply cannot do this show without each and every one of you doing so week in and week out. Whatever platform you're using to listen in to this podcast, hit the thumbs up, give it a star rating, a review. The biggest thing we can ask from you is share a link with a friend. That helps us more than you'll ever know, and we sincerely appreciate it. As always, we answer every single email we get here at the Drum Shuffle podcast. The email address is Coincidentally, the Drum Shuffle Podcast at gmail.com. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com, and you can find more information on me over at jamieeads.com. 1,000,001 thanks to Patrick Ferguson for coming on the show. Make sure you check out Crash and Ride podcast. I know he'll appreciate it, and so will I. Next week, I'm going to be joined by the great Daphnis Prieto to come on and talk about his new record. It's fantastic, as always, so you don't want to miss that. So until next time, may your head stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers, everybody.